Tēnā koutou, mihi atu kia koutou I tēnei ata, ko Kim Gottlieb tōku ingoa he kai hautu tūturu ki Otipoti. Kia ora, I'm Kim Gottlieb. I'm a tūturu lead here in Dunedin, Otipoti, and I'm one of the people who's lucky enough to be assisting with the rollout of these kinds of resources in our schools throughout the country. And I just want to have a special shout out to all the schools south of the Waitaki. Yeah. Thanks for coming. Can I have the slide, please, Pip? Next one, I think. Oh, here we go. This is my bit. Kia ora. What is Tūturu? For those of you that don't know about Tūturu, it's a modern approach to young people's wellbeing in Aotearoa, bringing together health providers and schools. So we are much better equipped to work with and prepare students for the complexities of modern life. It aspires for all young people to feel connected to and positive about their school. We work in 4 main areas: the school climate, pastoral care, PLD, and curriculum resources for students aged years 9 to 13. We really work on that intersection between education and health, because as we know, they're very different sectors and quite siloed. Tūturu is about bridging that gap between the services and wrapping around support around schools. But it initially began as introducing curriculum resources around AOD across the curriculum, so young people weren't just learning about it in year 9 and 10 health. Next slide, please, Pip. So we know that schools are ecosystems of support. The triangle model is one used by MOE and ERO around how we support all students with health education. Then some students need a bit more support, and a few students need the support of outside services. So we want to support schools to achieve and get support quickly and easily, which means aligning what students experience in the school environment that helps them to develop. So it's about connecting stuff that happens in school with learning, making them positive learning experiences. It means aligning what they learn. It means how they're supported at school when issues arise, how professional providers can provide additional support, and how the wider community of school whānau and services can help them to lead successful lives. So it's a really innovative space to be working in. And I must say, I work with a lot of schools. They're all very different. So Tūturu is, we call it the pivot in Tūturu, where we have to be incredibly flexible to meet the needs of every different school. But it's pretty incredible to be in that space and watch those things happen. Next slide, please, Pip. So there are Tūturu providers throughout the country now, of course, us here in Otipoti, Dunedin, and we are working in North, Central and South Otago as well. There are some leads in Ōtautahi and Christchurch, Waikato, and 2 leads in Tāmaki, Makaurau. So if you have any questions about Tūturu, you can go to our website, which I highly recommend. There's lots and lots of resources there, and lots more information there about Tūturu. Or you can contact me directly, happy to answer any questions that you have. And we have got a couple of schools down here that are willing to be some of the first schools in the country to roll out the resource. So it would be really good to be linking schools in about how that's going. Yeah, so kia ora, mihi atu kia koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
All right, so Jenny and I are going to co-share the rest of the presentation, and thank you, Kim, for that introduction to Tūturu, so that for particularly the maths teachers on the call, we have a bit more of an idea about how that connects in within our schools. So we're just going to talk a little bit about what we did when we started working together. And so just tell you a little bit about Census at School. So Census at School has been going since 2003. Every second year we develop a new questionnaire. And early in I'm going to say 2022, maybe it was late 2021. It's probably 20. Anyway, the Tūturu team approached the Census at School team, and we got together and we talked about the possibilities and working with our online survey. And so the 2023 questionnaire has two health attitudes questions in it. So I will just these are the two questions that we developed with we had an advisory group that consisted on Census at School members and Tūturu, of which Kim and Jenny were part of that advisory group, as well as myself and Mel, who's on the call, and I'm just seeing if there's anybody else who's jumping up. So we developed these two questions here, and if you've been in using Census at School with secondary students in the last 2 years, so 2023 and 2024, you will have seen these questions. And in the teacher's guide, it explains that both of these questions were part of this piece of work that we've been doing. All right, so we're going to have a little introduction to the resource. And I think that's you, Jenny, isn't it? Or do you want me to keep going? I think it's you.
Okay. So the resource itself is aimed at a year 9 to 11 audience, mainly year 9 and 10, but we stretched that slightly just in that we think there's probably quite a lot of opportunity here, particularly around some of that NCEA level 1 environment to make use of this resource in that space. And so really what this resource was an opportunity to do was to show what a connected curriculum approach or an integrated approach between statistics and health education could actually look like when we focus on some data, and in particular these Census at School questions. We've taken an inquiry approach to each of the main activities within the resource. So you'll find when the resource becomes available that both statistics and health education both have their own inquiry approaches. So we've used those both separately and together to shape up each of the activities, coming at the data in lots of different ways. Next slide, please, Pip. And just to sort of validate what we're trying to do here in the bigger picture of what's going on in education at the moment, this statement from the Ministry of Education's Literacy and Communication and Maths strategy really seemed to nail it in terms of the bigger purpose of what this resource is contributing to. Now, I'm not going to read this verbatim, but what we're acknowledging here is that statistics doesn't just belong in the little box of maths and stats, and statistics are something many subjects across the curriculum make extensive use of, and health education's no exception to that. Next slide, please, Pip. So the audiences for this resource are both health education and maths and stats teachers as the primary audience. I'll acknowledge that we did initially plan to involve English and social studies, but because those curriculum areas are in a bit of a state of flux at the moment, it became quite problematic including them at this time, but there's still a plan to extend this resource to include other learning areas as well. As noted, years 9 and 10 are the main focus, although it probably quite nicely stretches to NCEA level 1 materials, and have also indicated that it takes a guided inquiry approach. And we've needed to make that quite clear. This is not the type of inquiry where students sort of, go off and sort of pull things from all over this place to put their own inquiry together. It's guided from the point of view that this is also a vehicle for teaching the skills of statistical inquiry. And because it's also dealing with some quite sensitive subject matter from the health education point of view, it was also important to guide for a teacher guided process just to keep the inquiry in a fairly safe and ethical place. Next slide, please, Pip. So in terms of using the resource, which can I acknowledge is actually literally in production at the moment, it's all been proofread, it's actually with the team at the moment who are making it look pretty and a little more attractive than when I last saw it. Can we signal there's no requirement to teach the inquiry sequentially? So this is not it's not a program. So you're not starting at the beginning and working through to the end. You can dip into it, inquiry by inquiry. The inquiries can stand alone, or some of them might be put together in a sequence to form a unit. And we've indicated throughout the resource how they all link together. It does come with some additional video material. There's a couple of 4-minute videos featuring students talking about their response to some of the data from the Census at School findings. And there's also another couple of videos of topic experts from the online space and then also the alcohol space, talking particularly more to the health promotion side of these aspects. And just to, I know we're sort of in a maths and statistics audience here, but just to acknowledge there is also a bit of material in the resource that's aimed very much at the health promotion end of the story. So there are a couple of activities in here that are quite aimed more at a health education audience, just as there's a few in here that are going to talk a bit more to a stats audience. But for the most part, the resource is designed to have both the statistics teacher and the health education teacher contribute something to the learning. And we'll have a discussion later as to the logistics, how that might happen, and the various ways that schools manage their curriculum. Next slide, Pip. Okay, over to you.
Okay, so I'm going to, the resource itself has 3 parts. There's 4 parts really. There's an introduction part, which talks about different contexts in terms of, health education, statistics, introduces Census at School in terms of the tool and the resource. And then there's 3 parts. And part A is really where the big focus is on building those data capabilities. And then part B uses the ideas from part A in the online context and part C in the alcohol context. So I'm going to just go through the part A and just talk broadly about what's involved in there. And we've got, we did flash up some teachers' names earlier. I'd like to just acknowledge a handful of teachers who did help us by testing these materials out in their classrooms in a very busy end of term 1 time, which was greatly appreciated by us. So in part A, as we say, we're developing those capabilities. And as Jenny's already said, they can be used in isolation or in conjunction. And the data is using a range of the Census at School survey questions, not just the Tūturu ones, but other ones that relate to health and wellbeing. And there are 6 activities or inquiries in this section. And I'm going to, if I have sufficient time, I'm going to touch on each one briefly, but I'm going to look at the first one in a bit more depth than the remaining ones. So within a activity, we start off with overview or rationale, and that gives us a bit of background. So building up the context, if you like. And it talks to the safety considerations. And we'll have a look at what that looks like in a moment. And then there's the breakdown about what are the health education, learning outcomes, what are the statistics, learning outcomes, and key competencies. Then there's a little bit about how long we think it will take. There's a bit of a blurb about the data that we're using in the inquiry and any resources that are required. And then there's a section on the teaching process. And this is just a little bit of an example of what particularly the first section that looks like. So you'll see, for those of you that are maths teachers on the call, the PPDAC cycle is clearly spelt out. And you'll see we use inquiry investigative question, because actually in health education, they talk about inquiry questions and we talk about investigative questions. So we've just left them both in there. And so there's a bit of a, generally each parts of the cycle are attended to depending on what the particular task is looking at. There's a section on taking action. So that's where we bring particularly that health promotion side into it. There is the evidence of what you might be looking for from the students. There's an opportunity for teacher reflection, and then there's the references. So that's the structure of these activities. So let's have a look at the first one, the health, happiness and well-being, using the Census at School database. So this activity is an introduction to using the database that we have. And just I don't think that's a full overview rationale, but this is an example. So the activity aims to develop their capabilities or other inquiries, and we're using the happiness question. And the happiness question is, overall, how happy would you say you are? And then students learn how to, and then it just breaks down what's involved. So that's what's in the overview and rationale. And then in the safety considerations, I think this is a really key part for teachers, is because some of the topics we're dealing with could be quite, I guess, could be emotional, could be uncomfortable for some students. It's really important that as teachers we're aware of the implications or the considerations we should be looking at in that there. And I don't think these should put us off. I think these should be actually just things that we can go, hey, actually, this is great. I'm actually really thinking about the context that we're dealing with. And one of I'm going to show you a video from a teacher in a moment, and he explains how he found it really useful, and actually how he found an opportunity to have more conversations with his kids that he may have had previously. This one here, again, this is not the full thing. The full thing probably is over 2 or 3 pages, but this gives you an idea about how this particular one's set out. So we start with the problem, and that's the scene setting, and then we pose our questions, and then it explains how you source the data. So in this case, we were looking at getting a sample of 1,000 students, and that we haven't gone into it deeply in here, but we're dealing with categorical data mostly, so that's why we're looking at the larger sample size. And there's a whole learning thing around that we probably haven't done much of a maths yet about why we have samples of at least 1,000 for categorical data. In this one here, we do some work around the data visualizations, supporting students to read, and then the conclusion. And so the data, the information that's in there is sufficient that if you weren't a stats expert, you could still give this a go. You know, there's enough notes and guidance in there to help you work on this with your students. So you don't have to be a stats teacher or a maths and stats teacher to teach this. You could be a health teacher or a PE teacher who was teaching the health stuff, and you would be comfortable doing the stuff. And then at the end of the inquiry, there's a take action section. So I'm just going to give you a little moment to think about a question, an investigative question you could explore about happiness. And these are the variables that are available to you, but we're really focusing on happiness. So just in your head, think about what's the question I'm going to ask? And then I'm going to give you, if you type that tiny URL, and in fact, if I was good, I would put it in the chat. So let's see if I can get that sorted. I will put it in the chat for you, and you can go in and have a little play with the data. So there we go. There's the tiny URL. So if you want to go into that link, you can have a play. So I'm actually going to stop screen sharing in a moment. This is what you'll go into. If you've never used Kodak before, you click on graph, and then you can drag and drop variables. So I will do one we're not doing. I'll do screen time. I'll drag and drop that onto there, and then you get a graph of what you want. But remember, you're exploring happiness. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment so you can have a chance to have a play with that data. I'll give you 2 minutes tops. Okay. It may not have been 2 minutes, but that's, actually, let me just, a moment, caller, while I make sure I'm sharing my sound. Yes, I am. That's all good. All right. So you may have made a graph that looks something like this, or you may not have. But within the happy, I can do happy. There's some things that I might need to do, like rearrange the categories along the bottom. So you can do that by clicking and dragging the words across to get them in order, because they come up alphabetically initially. You'll notice that I've split it by year 10 and year 9, so there may be something different I want to see about that. And in this one here, I've actually got the percentages by row. So the 55% is saying 55% of year 10s say that they're happy. And so there's some stuff, obviously, we can do in there about categorical data. That's what I wanted to do. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly show you a video from Michael. Here we go.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Michael Walden from Mount Albert Grammar. Pip decided to throw the open sort of trial this sort of stuff out, and I'd love to try new stuff in the class, so why not? Admittedly, I only spent a couple of lessons on this with my year 10 girls class, and I kind of wish I had done more. In the past, I've used the census at school data a lot in my stats investigations, but generally as teachers, when we're rushed for time, we spend quite a bit of time on lame variables like bag weights. I'm sure there's people in the room that have done that. So I really appreciated the chance to engage in some deeper conversations with my students around things that matter to them, things like friends, and even more serious topics. I really appreciated the teacher guide, not only as a unit plan, so going through and looking at all the details and the questions that were suggested, and obviously they've been prepared by people that know their stuff in the teaching game, but also as prompts if the class went into a period where it was quiet. It gave us an opportunity to fill in that void with a good question. Having said that, when I trialed this material, the students weren't at all quiet. They were definitely engaged with it. The friends sort of thing, I was a bit worried that with a few quiet students in the class, that it would be a nervous thing for them to see on the scale of how many friends people have and what year levels and whatnot. But it actually generated a lot of discussion around people and having an important person in their life. Like I had a girls class. We found that girls had less significant friends than boys did. So we talked about what the definition of a friend was, and we actually had a genuine discussion around that. As I said, I wish I'd spent more time on this, because things, when you just give them a graph and get them to talk about it is one thing, but actually getting them to create the graph, discuss what's on each axis. One of the things I found really interesting was a graph of screen time versus sleep time. We were in a bivariate sort of context, and the students hypothesized that they'd see a negative relationship. If people spent more time on their screens, they'd spend less time sleeping. But the census at school data is really, really messy. So I could have spent like a whole lesson with the class just talking about the cleaning of data and what to do when your scatter graph is an absolute mess. There was a suggested sort of thing to look at some jitter. I would never have done that with a junior class beforehand. It would have always been like a senior level concept, but students really, took on board all the stuff that we covered and weren't afraid to look at graphs that were messy. And when we put a trend line on this mess, we actually saw it was negative. And then we could talk about the outliers and students entering their data wrong because they don't understand the how to read a 24-hour clock. So yeah, like really, really interesting.
I'm going to stop that there. It goes on for another couple of minutes, and if we had more time, I would do more, but we don't have all day today to do that. So I just want to really acknowledge Michael. He met up with me on the weekend, over the long weekend, so we could record that little video. And I think we talked for about half an hour afterwards, after we'd done the video. So he really enjoyed doing the work. So I'm going to look at the next one. So I'm going to go through these. I'm not going to read everything out in detail, but with the ones as I go through the remaining ones, I've sort of highlighted the bit that's really like the big focus of the inquiry cycle. in the activity. So this one here is around friendships and well-being. But with this one here, they're actually going to design their own questionnaire. So while we're working through the PPDAC cycle, there is a focus around, what measures do we need? So, why, what, when, where, how, who, etc., ethics, and how we go about primary data collection. Then the next one is on bedtime and wake time. And this one has a focus on formatting and presenting the data. And this is the one where we look at managing the data. So the data is really messy for the bedtime in particular. As Michael mentioned, this confusion between 12 and 24-hour clock is there. And I have actually got this set up, but I'm not going to do that for now. If we finish and people want to have a play, you can go and have a play with this one, but I will show you. This is what the data looks like when you first get it. And you can see bedtime at the top and wake time at the bottom, and then the sleep time graph. And yeah, anyway, you can see, for those of you that are looking at it and going, oh, we've got a bimodal distribution, I wonder why. And we've got some kids that have had, 20 hours sleep. And so there's lots of really cool conversations and can come out of that data, and just how students have recorded their sleep time, or the time they went to bed, confusing, PM and AM and things like that. And so there's lots of good discussions around that cleaning data. And Lee Masters from Wanganui City College, she tried this with her students, and she's actually shared a couple of resources that I will make available when we put the material up. But she found it was a really good activity, and it was, she was talking about a mixed ability class, so students from level 3 through 5 were comfortable getting into it, and they were, again, like Michael said, it's that relevancy that the kids found of it, and having a guess at what the graphs look like. So, it seems that when teachers, and we really asked them cold to give these activities a go with no prior anything, it was just like, well, you try it, yep, okay. So that was cool. The next one is screen time after school. And this one here has a real focus on secondary data, so provided secondary data, and then describing and reasoning from the data. So we're still working through the cycle. We're still exploring, understanding the problem context. We're still answering the question, but different focus in this one here. And then this is some of the data so in many of the activities, there's data available for students to look at. So if they don't have to necessarily get data from census at school, they can use, there are resources provided as well. And Lee Chapman from Te Aratai College in Christchurch, so she found that students engage with the ideas more than they usually do in maths class, and they enjoy the context. So that idea of engagement and the context being relevant and interesting to the students is really coming through quite key here, I think. And like Michael said, we often do things, because we've been doing them for years, like bag weights and heights and everything, but these questions actually allow us to look at some different bits and pieces. Screen time after school and sleep time. So this one here really was, they were taking the issue, and then they had to make their summaries, and really much more a focus on justifying why they've come up with it, whatever results they've come up with. And then I think this is the last one. This one was on attitudes to teenage alcohol. And this one's a little bit differently set up. The kids have actually got a reading, like a newspaper article, and then they've got to use the data to agree or disagree with whether what's presented as misinformation, disinformation, or true and accurate. So it's a just slightly different approach. And this is what they get. So they get a reading, and then they get the tables and the graphs, and they can use that evidence to read the article and see what's going on in there. Okay, so that's the teaching and learning part. So I'm going to hand back to Jenny, who's going to go through the remaining section.
Thanks, Pip. Now, as Pip's alluded to there, this is actually quite a big resource, as it's turned out. The front section, or the section A that Pip's been talking about, when we were putting this together, it kind of fell out that it made sense to have this more skills development section, and a lot of the focus of each of those first 6 inquiries then gets revisited with the online questions and or the alcohol questions. And as she's also alluded to, that we've put very detailed teacher instructions in these with a view that it wouldn't necessarily have to be the stats teacher or the health teacher picking these activities up. And I would also say, when having written a lot of resources in my life, I don't expect people to follow the recipe exactly. And if it actually sparks other ways of doing things or other areas of interest, we do encourage people to make the most of that census of school database. But next slide, please. So just very briefly, just give you a quick overview of the structure from here on. Part B is about attitudes to being online, and Part C is around the alcohol attitudes. What the sort of common approach across all of these inquiries has been to provide both a statistical process where the students can actually go and download their own data and analyse it and so on, or for teachers who are either not confident to do that or just don't have time, we've also presented some samples of data already prepared in tables and graphs. And so depending on the time available, the context in which it's being taught, these inquiries can be approached slightly differently depending on the context in which they're being taught. Next slide, please. Just very briefly, having noted that Part A is kind of the skill setup, what this slide is sort of showing is where these sort of statistical and data use skills then get reused. Now, it's not an exact mapping, but across that, using the census at school database, presenting the data, interpreting it, all of those things in combination then play out through a variety of the inquiries in parts B and C. There's another version of designing your own survey, but this time with quite a shift to going from talking about friendships and well-being at quite a personal or individual level to exploring more of a whole school look at a survey around, in this case, alcohol attitudes. And because of the content or the subject matter that we're dealing with both of these health attitudes questions, there's kind of a recurring theme around misinformation and disinformation, and making use of good quality data to, for thinking critically, basically. And so while some of the inquiries in this Part A don't exactly map on, they're setting students up to be able to sort of take the next step and apply these skills either in combination or to some slightly different contexts. As we said before, though, these things can be mixed and matched. So it's not this is a program, you must start here and follow it through to here. It's kind of I sort of think of a lot of the resources I develop as sort of being like a recipe book, but more of a recipe book for inspiration rather than a recipe like following, baking a cake where you've really got to follow the recipe, otherwise you don't get what you want at the other end. These are more inspiration type resources. By all means, follow the recipe if that's what makes sense and if that's what's useful. But if you can see a better way of doing this, or use it as a springboard to some other ways you can use that census at school data, by all means take those. Next slide, please, Pip. Can I also acknowledge there are some other forms of data collection that we didn't quite sneak into the intro section. And in particular, there are 4 inquiries where students will actually need to recode the data. And these are particularly where they've had to note their response in 5 words or less. So this is a way of looking at ways that you might analyse written material. And what they're actually doing with these inquiries is actually interpreting them in relation to a couple of health education concepts. So for a couple of the activities, they actually put Mason Jury's Wharitapa Whā model over the top of their analysis, and in another one, they take another health concept called the socio-ecological perspective and lie that over the top of their data as a way to help make sense of it. And just while we're talking other forms of data collection, the very final inquiry is actually a different form of data collection altogether. So we're sort of stepping aside from the Census at School database as such to look at another way of collecting data. And this one's actually about collecting visual data. And based on some Australian research that was done over last year before, this is about taking screenshots of alcohol ad pop-ups on social media just to record in a fairly systematic way how often a young person has alcohol ads turn up on their social media feed in unsolicited ways. Now, obviously, with the cell phone ban in schools, that's more of a homework collecting exercise. But even if that particular inquiry doesn't quite land that well, just the whole idea of looking at different ways of collecting data is kind of a key point to what that one is about. Obviously, if the alcohol ad pop-ups are problematic, given how many different products are marketed to young people online, it's something that could be done with any range of products that we find popping up being marketed to us in the online environment. Pip, next slide, please. And the remaining inquiries mentioned already around the sort of health promotion side of things. Some of the inquiries actually build on each other a bit more, if depending on what time there is available to pursue some of these things. And this is where, if you have got opportunity for the stats teacher and the health ed teacher to be sharing the learning around this, there are some activities that are probably quite nicely picked up by the stats teacher and others that are more perhaps aligned to the health ed teacher, but not to be limiting around that. And so there are also inquiries looking at the impact of manipulated content online and what to do about it. So that health promotion side coming in, impact of disturbing content online and what to do about it. And that's where some of the video also comes to play, because there's some guidance there in those videos. And then also help seeking and support. So this is perhaps getting into the health ed end of things, but if there's opportunity, like we say, for the stats teacher and the health ed teacher to come together and complement each other, some of the inquiries do kind of nicely tease out into those different subject areas. Next slide, please, Pip. I think we're just about there. You want to pick it up from here?
Sorry, we've got everything's come out now. Okay, so hopefully I'm unmuted. There we go. So the resource has been developed with the intention that, we can collaborate with our colleagues. So, stats teachers collaborate with their health ed teachers collaborate with stat teachers. And if that works, it will be fabulous. And if it doesn't matter, because actually there is plenty in there for both or either of them to pick up and work the whole lot or parts of it themselves. As Jenny and I have already said, Part A, really, if you are going to split it across in a high school, you may want to do the Part A inquiries sort of dotted over a couple of weeks or a couple of months, depending on what's happening, by the stats teacher, and then the other inquiries are picked up by the health ed teacher. But, it does say there that they're developed with the intent. So it may even be that you're doing an inquiry over 2 or 3 lessons where they maybe are with health, then stats, then health, or stats, health, stats. And that's a really lovely way of doing it as well. I mean, I think the biggest thing here is that don't be limited by the fact that you have to work with a colleague. Embrace the opportunity to work with a colleague and actually see the richness that comes out for both of you. Just on a little aside, I did work in a high school in Auckland, or a middle school actually in Auckland for a while, and I had a PE health teacher working with a maths teacher, and they were looking at music videos, and they were looking at how both male and female can be sexualized, I guess, in these videos. And I was listening to the health teacher talking with the students about what things they might do. And it was just, I was like, blew my mind, because I'm like, I never would have thought of any of that as the stats teacher. I probably could have got some of it. But even to the point when they were looking at the videos and making decisions about how do they actually, what's a data point? And so they agreed that when the angle of the shot changed, that was like a new data point. So they didn't keep going like every second, though it's still blah, blah, blah. And so those sorts of things that happened in real time, and even the fact that you can't just watch the video once and record everything, you've got to watch it one time with maybe looking at this particular variable, and then you look at it another time looking at this variable. And so it was that lovely connection between the two subjects that was really beneficial. Jenny, do you want to add anything to that one?
No, nothing specific at this point. I mean, that's, but yeah, it's that sort of nice collaboration where, I mean, even working with Pip throughout this resource, we've sort of been bouncing ideas off each other and sort of, oh yeah, you know, just because you sort of get kind of locked into your own subject mindset, just the opportunity to see some other learning opportunities to really sort of go deep and get a lot of mileage out of that, you know, whatever the nature of the data or the source of the data.
And so what we thought, we'd just give you an opportunity to just have a little think about how you might go about using the resource. So just dropping some ideas into the chat that may give others some ideas. So I'm just going to stop chatting for a moment and just give you an opportunity to drop some of those ideas in. That's not what I wanted to do. That's why. Hey, nobody's feeling brave today. That's all good. Maybe you'll go away and have a chat with your colleagues and have a think about, here we go. We had a school down here that did some cross-curricular learning around cell phones, and that worked very well. All right, so let's just wrap this up. So, Jenny, I'll let you talk to this one.
Okay, just in terms of context, while this is an AMA webinar, obviously, and you'll have all your connections to your mathematics community, if anyone was looking for some more health education related support, we still have Networks of Expertise funding for this year. So if you were after anything more than what's in the resource, you're welcome to contact NZHEA at the email provided. And we also have a range of other resources, which incidentally do have a few statistical things scattered throughout them, although this would be the most concentrated focus on statistics we've put into a resource to date. And as Kim noted at the beginning, Tūturu have its own website, and they also have a whole toolkit of resources should you be interested in pursuing things beyond the resource. We haven't got an exact date on the publishing of the resource yet. There's just been a little hiccup in the last week or so, but we're expecting it hopefully earliest term 3 by the sounds of things.
And I've checked in with Mel, and we will email everyone who registered for the webinar. We will email you once we know, once that they've gone up. So we're just going to we're going to wrap up here. So Jenny, you can contact her, the Kaiarahi at healtheducation.org.nz, and you can contact me, Pip at karikari.education.co.nz anytime if you've got questions or you want to share, if you use it with your class and you want to share with us. We always love hearing about how things go.